We're live.
Thank you. Okay, good late afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all. My name again is Boyne Smotherson, Third Ward City Councilman of U City, and as of today, Mayor Pro Tem. We have the Mayor Crow is excused due to illness, and we also have Councilmember Cusick, who's also excused due to absence. So again, we're going to move forward, and I do want to thank you all for being here. This is Monday, July 11th, 2022, and we're going to open this study session and turn it over to, well, first of all, I wanted to ask, are there any changes to the agenda for tonight? Be no changes, I'll turn it over to Mr. Rose. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Smotherson and council members, this agenda item asks that you receive a presentation on the options for the fence. This is related to the Annex and Trinity Building renovations. I would like to also comment that the review at this time, I have authorized Trivers to move forward with preparation of the bidding documents for the renovation side of it. I've asked that they carve out the fence since we still need to receive direction from you on that particular item. But in order to ensure that we're not slowing the project down, I've asked them to have that as a add-on. Also, this project is being required to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission. The reason for that, as I understand it, is the fence was added after the HPC did its initial review. So our intention is to bring that back to them for their consideration shortly. With that, I believe we have Amanda here with us again tonight, with Trivers, who is the senior project manager that will be providing the presentation. We also have Chief Hampton that will be kicking this presentation off. And so Chief Hampton, I will turn things over to you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the council, Mr. Rose, Mr. Mulligan. Today, I'll be doing a short presentation on a few slides and some information about the security needs and security zone for the police department. And these are based off of CEPTED suggested, as well as Department of Defense suggested renovations. Excuse me. In 2019, you can see there was approximately 2,200 inmates that escaped from state, federal prisons in the United States. Now, specifically, this is a significant number, but there's not a number that can track jails or holding cells like the municipal departments that is not being tracked by a federal government or a state government specifically. So it's basically on the honor system for the accreditation body or the accrediting body that these municipal governments have to report to on that. You can see the main attempt is usually within transport. We will have to do transport from the police facility over to courts, or from the police facility to St. Louis County, from the police facility to the hospitals, or to other jurisdictions themselves, like when we have to take or bring, or if some are being dropped off to us. So there is a heightened risk of escape anytime you're dealing with jails and holding persons particularly. Excuse me. Law enforcement personnel that were ambushed within even their own parking lots or unsecured lots or what have you. You have numbers that are growing by the day. You see a Fayetteville officer ambushed, sitting in his car, waiting on a partner to come out. So these are uniformed cars, uniformed police personnel, and yet the threat is still active and real. You can see the need of that growing as we continue to speak. I just want to bring to light Sergeant Mike King. He was not on the police lot. However, he was at Leland and Delmore on routine patrol. Ambush, shot and killed specifically by a perpetrator that had no conversations with Sergeant Mike King. This was on Halloween night. I was myself working, preparing for the midnight shift for our officers for that Halloween night. That's back when we were working a different shift level, but Sergeant King was assigned to the Delmore Loop area or business district down there, and this was in public view. You can see right now, I'm recently coming back from the FBI Police Academy. So these particular statistics got brought up there, as well as the research that we've had to do. These are 297 cities, all that have a population over 100,000 or more. And St. Louis outranks them out for the most dangerous city in the U.S. currently as of February of 2022. This is a Forbes.com study, researched and peer reviewed. It was kind of shocking to me, but I actually had someone from the DC or the DMV area that came to me and wanted to talk more about the St. Louis area because he had never been up here, but wanted to come to a Cardinal game. And I kind of assured him that we can keep him safe for something like that. The UCPD needs for combating crime trends continues to grow. As these trends continue to migrate, as they continue to evolve and be enhanced by the methods for which they do these crimes. Right now, we're in a temporary facility. So the infrastructure specifically has to be that state-of-the-art infrastructure to keep those needs in balance, to have that forward thought and to have that forward planning of these trends that will come, as well as the growth of our department. As we know, another business district, which will be the west end of the town on Olive, in the Olive Business District. Now we will have two prominent business districts on either end of our community. So we're making sure we balance the need for those crime trends. We want to continue to have an infrastructure to meet that. These are aerial views of the employee parking lot. These are after-hour shots of police vehicles only that I can speak of. I do not know of any city hall employees parked there after hours specifically, but these are after-hour views that we took from a drone aerial, actually drone operator over here. Dari was actually one that captured some of these views, and these are recent. So we're talking less than a month. This is a current view of a depiction of Baldwin Police Department that's being currently constructed. I spoke to Derek of DG2, who's involved in that construction of the perimeter gating of the fencing around that area, around that facility. And I believe he mentioned that it was approximately 50% completed at this point. So they're making progress and they're moving towards what you're seeing right here, this depiction that they have online. This is in public research capabilities. This is the Belleville Police Department with a similar set. This is an old, a former bank building. I spoke to the chief months ago. I knew the former chief. I believe they have a transition at this period, but this is a perimeter fencing around that area. I can say that it does separate police parking and police personal parking in the rear of their lot. They have this fence surrounded their perimeter now, and there is one entrance for the public. They have three entrances and three other exits, let me say that, for police vehicles and police issues. If they have any disturbing civil unrest that may lead towards their facility, then they use Jersey barriers. So they are in the process of closing out that one open space that they have. But specifically, they do separate the parking for the police vehicles and the police personal cars as well. Department of Defense best practices. This is, it was mentioned where are some of these physical security system functions coming from. This is from the research that you can see online. You can research this as well. Department of Defense best practices around the physical security around the perimeters of jailing, prisons, holding cells, whatever the case is, and law enforcement and criminal justice infrastructures. CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. They have several points that they like to hit. They have their own pillars within the CPTED model. You see the lighting, the landscaping, the fencing. Fencing should allow people to see in, and which is what we're proposing. Even if the fences are built for privacy, they should be a design that is not too tall and has some visibility. The understanding of making sure that the public is safe, not just the employees that work at the facility are safe as well. Well, I can tell you now that if we have a successful prison break or a jail break or a escapee, that they would not flee towards the Delmore Loop area. That is a public area that we know, we have tons of cameras. We patrolled that recently. They would flee north of us, within the closed subdivision behind us, in the rear of us. And that's just in my professional experience opinion in that. But that is what we would see. We haven't had any successful. I can speak of several attempts. We had an attempt this weekend, and I don't want to get too graphic, but the prisoner actually used his own feces to escape from his handcuffs in a process area. All it takes is one attempt for them to be right. And it takes us we have to be right and correct every time. So specifically, if those other layers of security were not fully functioning or not ready, or say there was a door being open at the same time when he escaped his handcuffs, he would have escaped our facility. That is something that I can speak on specifically from this weekend. And that's knowledge that we learn and we train and we understand. Okay, now they're manipulating handcuffs by way of these methods. This is crime prevention through environmental design. Generally, crime perpetrators will avoid areas that only allow them one way in to enter and exit, also that they have high visibility and have a high volume of user traffic. This is something that is very significant within the CPTED model, that the transparent fencing around the perimeter helps the deterrence when you're bringing these prisoners in and out, that they understand that the ability to escape is very limited, very limited. I show right here is a person's will to complete a task can often outmatch preparation. So you can see on the left, that is a aftermath of the Kirkwood 2008 aftermath of Cookie Thornton shooting and the incident that happened there. His first person that he killed during that incident was a police officer on the parking lot. It took multiple mutual aid jurisdictions to help quell that situation before the tragic outcome had weighed in. To the right, you see an aerial view of University City, the City Hall, the former police and fire building to the right of that. It's just a aerial view for depiction of that. So understanding that a person's will can outmatch any training or preparation that you have. Like I said, it only takes one time for them to get that right. And I'm on the questions part. This the part you.
I think we'll allow Amanda to complete her presentation and then take questions at the end.
Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you. So I'm really just going to briefly introduce Derek Don with DG2, who's been looking at some additional options for the fence material as well as for the geographic area of the fence. So we're going to do a quick recap of some of the things that we presented last week, and then talk about some of these alternates that we've been working on with the chief since our last session with you guys.
Thanks, Amanda. Good evening. Just to recap where we were last meeting, just to be brief, the secure zone center of the site. We had looked at a site plan with the security outlined in red, being the 8-foot tall anti-climb fence that I had a sample of last time. This is really a reflection of months of conversations, meeting with the chief, his department, and others to weigh in on this. This is really looking at secured parking, all within that 8-foot tall fence with vehicular gates that would slide open with badge readers, so quick turnover, card reader, pedestrian gates. Then also on the public side on the parking lot of the north was reusing that black ornamental fence. Some additional images of that we could come back to if needed. And just to recap on the parking, we're right at the 63 spaces that we're trying to shoot for. I think the program was initially 66 or 67. The shortcoming of that was the west lot with the work and determination by the planning department was that needed to have some accessible ADA spaces added. So it was really where we lost a couple spaces since I believe our DD documents. We had temporary parking at the connector entry for five spaces. 2 of those would be ADA. And then there were 76 public spaces on the north lot with 4 of those being ADA proximate to the Trinity building entry. One of the things that we heard loud and clear at the last meeting was could we entertain a look at a different fence type? So in conversations with Chief Hampton and referencing the Baldwin project that he had mentioned that our team was involved with from a site design aspect, was that project was using a 8-foot tall Ameristar fence, which is the same company that made that anti-climb fence. This one is not marketed as an anti-climb fence, but it is still a deterrent. It's still 8-foot tall. And it has the vertical metal pickets, which is really kind of complementary to the existing black ornamental fence that you would see around not only the campus here, but the Lewis Center to our neighbor property. This would also have the ability to have the vehicular gates and the pedestrian gates in the same family, the same style, so everything would still match all the way around the perimeter. So that was one option that the chief and I had discussed since our last meeting about an option there. That is, again, the one from Baldwin. This idea here would maintain the existing perimeter to maximize that parking with the vehicular gates, the pedestrian gates, basically maintaining that what you saw last time, just swapping out the fence type. And Chief Hampton, if I misstate anything, please feel free to jump in. One of the other options that we had, or some of the other discussions that we had, were just the pedestrian connections through the site, so it doesn't appear that it is, a secure site that the public's not welcome to come through. We heard from at I think our design meeting back in June, I believe. It seems like a long time ago, just a month ago or so, from the neighbors about keeping pedestrian access. So in talking with the chief, the dashed black line is an existing sidewalk that's there today. The dark circle there on that blue fence line would be a option of a kind of a pedestrian code gate, and that 4-foot tall fence that would allow the neighbors who live there that have the code the ability to come through that gate. We'd add back in a sidewalk on the north side of the Trinity building, and then allow for the connection on the public sidewalk out to Mike King Drive for those pedestrian routes to and from the library for the residential area. So that was something the chief was willing to add back into the project. But again, that was keeping the secure zone similar to what you previously saw. And then one option that we did look at was pulling the fence line on the west side. So along Trinity Avenue, Princeton Avenue there, pulling that fence line in. So the existing, let me see if this works here. So this existing part of the parking lot that is there now, which with 12 spaces with no fence around it. The idea that parking lot would basically exist as it is today, and then pulls that secure zone further inboard, really in line with the edge of the parking on the west side now. What that would do, just to recap this would have 25 spaces on the west side in the secure zone. There would be 12 spaces, whether that's police staff or other city staff, in an unsecured zone that would just allow that pedestrian gate, the vehicular gate that would move further inboard. And you can see the parking counts there basically stay the same. They're just distributed slightly different. The parking on Mike King Drive would stay the same way. And if I back up one, I think it's important to mention that early on the project and in recent conversations with the chief, the idea, we had looked at several that pulled and adjusted the fence line boundary on Mike King Drive. Really from a kind of a non-starter, from a security perspective and an operational perspective, was that the Sally Port needed to be within a secure zone, which is why that fence line is maintained where it is today. That turn movement and that apron out there, that concrete area, if I point to that. This one here, we've looked at turn movements that would allow for the transport vehicles and an ambulance to basically pull in and back up. So this area in here is really needed for that vehicular movement. And also from distant operations, if both of those bays are occupied and the garage door is down, this would allow a police car to pull in and be within a secure zone to at least recognize some of the concerns that the chief mentioned just a little bit ago. And then the other thing would just highlight, these are some slides that folks have seen before, but the blue circles on both Princeton and Mike King Drive were really intended for the framework and the function of the site to have specific city staff and police parking access only. So we're not intermixing city staff and police with the public to really separate those just for ease of entry. And then the public entries are all there off of Mike King Drive. I know this doesn't really deal with security in a way, but I believe Councilman Clay, you had asked about some walking distances from last time. So we just wanted to highlight the pedestrian routes, highlighting there in that lighter blue color, the potential for that pedestrian access on the north side of Trinity. And then I added this one there just for a little bit of perspective. So this is putting our proposed site plan in context with the loop, here Del Mar on the south. So the connector entry here, for reference, if somebody would come to City Hall or the connector entry and park in that far back space and then walk on the public walkways with common elements of landscape and lighting to the front door, that's about a 550-foot walk. Just to put that in perspective, walking from the front door of Trinity to the current front door of City Hall is about 465 feet. And then from there on Del Mar, basically a block from, I think it's Leland to Kingsland, is about 725 feet. So just a little bit of perspective on those walking distances. But again, we're providing public parking there at the front entry of the connector. So those are the slides that we had prepared. I don't know, Amanda, if you want to add anything else on the kind of the guidelines that we've been using.
Thank you, Derek. So I did want to give just a quick update. We don't necessarily have any slides to speak to this, but I wanted to share just a little bit more background about the historic questions that have kind of come up related to the project and how we're approaching the renovations and the site work. There have been some questions about whether or not we're familiar with the master plan from 1985, and we are. And we have reviewed it, and we fully believe that everything that we're doing on the site fully complies. Amy Gilbertson, who is really our lead historic architect on the project, who kind of speaks at conferences about the standards for rehabilitation kind of all over the country. She wasn't able to be here tonight, but I am going to read something, a bit of just a summary of the ways in which we believe the site is addressing the historic. And I do want to state that we did show the fence at the historic review. We did not show it, I think, necessarily in the very graphic manner that we're showing secure versus not. But there was a site plan that showed the extent of the fence at that time, and even the material type, I believe. But we are planning on going back to historic later this month. But just kind of for this council's visibility, I just kind of wanted to share some of our approach to the site and historic. The first point that Amy makes is that we are aware of, and we have the City Plaza Master Plan from 1985. The master plan recommends using the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation for individual projects undertaken within the historic district. We've completed over 100 projects, historic projects, and Trivers understands this to be best practice standard, and we're intimately familiar with these guidelines and how to properly apply them to projects at historic structures. And then Amy notes that we've been presented knowledge sessions about these standards for preservation at state, national, and international conferences. We can confidently state that this design thus far for the annex and training buildings, as well as the site development, complies with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. Within the master plan, there are suggestions for site and circulation development within the district. However, on page 10, the master plan, there is acknowledgement that projects have been developed from a planning perspective only with minimum design investigation. Further, it says, it is the planner's expectation that not all of the projects will be achieved as described. So that said, our current design does deviate from the site plans developed in 1985. The current proposed plan must support the program that will be held within the annex in Trinity, as well as address the community wishes for better accessibility and additional public parking. It is notable that this community desire existed in 1985 and was confirmed as still being an issue in 2019 through public engagement surveys. Public parking will be greatly improved through the current project. Although circulation paths are different than those proposed in the 1985 master plan, the proposed site development does still comply with the standards for rehabilitation. Last point she's got here is historic light fixtures are planned for the public right-of-way to continue with the already existing design methodology that surrounds City Hall. However, because the standards for rehabilitation specifically discourage creating a false sense of history with new design interventions, new site fixtures have been selected to be of their time, which is 2022, while remaining compatible with and not detracting from the historic character defining features of the building. And a lot of these things, the 2022 lighting those are things that we can do to shield from dark sky, from, overcast lighting into the neighborhood. They're just, kind of more advanced lighting technologies that we're using and to right size that scope as well. And yeah, that's what I've got for historic overview. I think, Derek, do you have anything else to add in with regards to landscape or?
No, sorry, I did fail to mention that along the security fence, whichever one we would ultimately choose to go with, the landscape plans you can see here on the backside of the generator in that parking lot. If I highlight this, where we can, we're obviously respecting the existing trees, the canopy trees that are there. There's some fantastic trees out there. We're supplementing with additional evergreen screen with understory screening. And we'll be providing landscape adjacent to the fence, the security fence, as best we can within budget as well. And I think there was maybe a question that came through. The generator here would be at the parking lot elevation. And then there would be a retaining wall, which would be on the, I guess, the south and the west side. That would help screen the generator. And then there'd be additional landscape on top of that. So really from street view, you'll be looking across the existing lawn with trees and the generator would be set down below. So sorry, I forgot to talk a little bit about the landscape. So I believe those are the slides that we had for you this evening on the update on the fence and security.
Mayor Pro Tem, if you will, I did have some questions that I received from council members.
Yes, sir.
And so I wanted to have the team address these questions. So the first one is the current employee parking along Sergeant Mike King Drive is intended to be converted to additional public parking?
At this time, this scope did not include the parking on Mike King Drive. That is currently marked for city staff only. We did do a preliminary investigation that the curb to curb of that street with city standards for public parking would be a little tight, a little restricted. So there would have to be some variances made if that would be converted to public parking. But I'm sure between us and our civil engineer and public works, I'm sure we could come with a solution if that would be intended to be converted.
Okay. How many disabled parking spots are allocated in the short-term parking near the connector? And what are the standards for distance of disabled parking from an entrance?
No, good questions. So if I back up a couple slides here just to have a visual in front of us. The temporary parking there at the connector building has 5 total spaces. 2 of those are ADA spaces. Those 2 ADA spaces are the ones in this graphic in the upper left corner. So really the guidelines are to try to get those spaces as close to the public entry as possible. We've worked to have both the stairs and our walkway, our accessible ramp that brings both users, able-bodied and non-able-bodied, to the same front door. So it's really cohesive and user-friendly there. And the reason why the parking is also on this side up against the building is made it be as perceived from just walking the site, but there is quite a bit of grade change from this corner as it falls away. I guess that would be from southwest to northeast. So with the parking, to get this to be ADA parking, the parking had to be on the building side of that drop off just because of grades. ADA parking has to be less than 2% in all directions. And by moving the parking inboard like this, that we are able to meet that. So that was a little bit of a long-winded answer, but that's kind of why parking is where it is there.
Are the recommendations being made regarding the fencing? Is this based upon some sort of best practice? And if so, is that information available?
I believe the best practice are really, in conversation with the chief that he shared just a minute ago with you all. So we're using, deterrence, visual, cues that you can still see through there. So really taking, what the chief shared with you all was what he shared with us early on the project.
Okay. A few more questions for you. Would there be any security lost from having a 8 or 6 foot wrought iron fence versus the no climbing fence? Chief, that's probably a better question for you to respond to. I think it might be difficult still to climb that wrought iron fence that's being recommended as well.
Right. I think there's not a measurable component that we can say, because you can't really measure deterrence, but understanding the capabilities of hopping an 8 foot fence is a lot more limited than hopping a lesser height in fence. So that, just keeping that in mind, those are the measures. We tell the officers all day long, as far as the patrolling efforts, you can't measure the deterrence. You don't know how many crimes you averted by your patrol habits or by your command presence.
Chief, this is a question for you as well. How many daily secured parking spaces are needed for the purpose of police vehicle parking, as well as personal vehicles for police officers and other police staff members? Do you have a number there?
Yes, sir. And that's very tricky, because we have over 100+ employees, and with the growth of the city, the growth of the police department we suggest allocation, i.e. like business district growing out west. So specifically, right now, 6 to 10 electric vehicles will be absorbing these spaces. That does not include the rotation of 4, 8, and 12-hour shift rotations coming in and out of personal vehicles and fleet vehicles back into the daily operations. So that's kind of an understanding. We knew with the first presentations of the spaces that everyone was not going to be able to park personal vehicles within the secured zone, along with police vehicles as well. We understood that, especially with the sharing of any other personnel that for City Hall purposes.
Chief, thank you. There was also a question I received regarding the number of employee staff from City Hall that actually uses that parking lot in the afternoon and evenings. And I think that, with the exception of, typically that happens during planning commission meeting or council meetings. But outside of that, it's pretty de minimis, I would say, the number of staff that actually use that parking lot. We have some janitorial staff that works in the evening and afternoons, but outside of that, I don't know that. Well, we also have the dispatchers and police officers, but excluding those, public safety, I think it's a pretty small number of staff that would use it on a consistent basis outside of the meetings that we have.
Yes, sir. And just to put that in perspective, right now, our current numbers for fleet vehicles, marked vehicles alone, or fleet vehicles for the police department, is in the mid-30s, and that's growing. So understanding that component, that absorbs another large chunk of we're not talking about personal vehicles specifically. So even outside of the business hours, those vehicles will need to be parked in that particular secure zone at all times. Any vehicles that's not in use.
Thank you. I had one final question this is probably Amanda, perhaps, or her team. Can additional parking be achieved by removing the Sally Port area from the secured area and providing additional public parking at 45-degree angle facing southeast along Mike King Drive with one-way access from north side near the Sally Port with a one-way out exit on the south side in front of the connector building entrance. Did you get all that?
Yeah, I think so. That was a mouthful, but I think just to kind of recap, the idea of flipping the parking that we have currently to the building, having that closer to Mike King Drive, and potentially bringing a one-way in this way. I believe that was, if I understand that correctly. I guess a couple of things from the very beginning of the project. One, a non-starter from a police operations perspective was that the Sally Port would be desired to be in that secure fence zone. A couple other things that we had looked at is, again, separating both city staff and police vehicular circulation points from the public, just to keep that a little bit cleaner and simpler. One of the other things too is that there is, again, quite a bit of grade change through here. So actually, when that question was passed along, looked at it from a civil perspective, talked to our civil engineer, that the grades actually, by moving the parking up here, we're able to get those in there in a relatively flat zone. Once we start pushing parking this way and extending it this way, your grade is actually pushing 8 to 10%. So just for reference, if you're in a typical parking garage on a angled parking deck, those are typically in the 5 to 6%. So anytime you go over 6%, when you go out to get out of your car, your car door will want to kind of swing wide open. So it's just not a best practice if you can avoid it. And then again, the concrete apron that is out in front of the Sally Port, we have looked at both the ambulance that the city staff has and the turn movements for the transport van that they have. And really every little bit of pavement out there is needed for those turn movements when a car would actually back up and then go to leave that facility. So really the turn movement for that concrete, looking at it on plan may not look like it's much, but it's pretty important to the functionality to get in and out of the Sally Port. So.
Thank you.
No,
Mayor
thank
Pro
you.
Tem, those are all the questions that I wanted to raise.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rose. Are there any questions by the council members? Councilmember Clay, please.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Smotherson, and thank you to our consultant Trivers and Chief Hampton for your remarks. I had a question about the walking distances, and I appreciate you including that in the updated packet. So, should have asked this before, did not. I don't know if you have this information. The distance from the current lot where most people park to either the front door or the back door, do we have a sense of what that distance is?
Let me just pull that slide up. We can maybe make some assumptions here. So from the parking lot in terms of existing parking back here, if you would pull in.
I guess so. I mean, I think people park, and I'm kind of looking to those who work in this building can probably tell me better than I can guess, but I assume people park in the front, in those spots that are kind of designated off to the side there and within the lot. Currently, I imagine patrons park there as well. And so a lot of backdoor access, I would imagine, from there. And then there's a couple of spots like in the very front where I guess people go straight in the front door. It seems considerably less than what's being proposed. And I realize you took this 550 is from the most extreme spot.
Correct. All
So
the way
we
in the
won't
back,
use
yeah.
that as
Right.
as the actual
Right.
distance. I don't think most people will be parking there by choice. But it is probably around 500 feet.
And I didn't take any calculations if somebody was parking in one of these closer spaces here. My guess is it's probably in the 300 to 350 foot
So
distance.
it is okay, so
It would be
considerably less than
because
that.
you have, there's 10 spaces there. That's 9 feet. That's at least, just this run right here is, 90 plus feet going to that back parking lot area.
Okay, so if people are parking in the front, it's more like 3.
Yeah, and I don't have that off the top of my head, so I don't want to
Okay.
misspeak, but I could provide that back to you. if that would
I
be
think
helpful.
without getting mired in the specifics of everything, it just seems like we're asking folks to walk more. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. And I know that we want to folks to the connector.
Mhm.
That's where they can do a lot of business. That front door, though, if you can still park in those, you can still park in those spaces that.
I'm going to back while I don't want to cut you off. I'm going to back up to another slide just
Okay.
to speak a little bit better to this one here. Yeah. Is this one better for you?
So you can still park in those spaces that you've always been able to park in, correct?
These
There's
spaces
to the
here.
west, the
Yes.
extreme west, in the lot and on the side of the building, next to the Scientology building, those to the extreme west.
Yeah, those. And then if the possibility of moving that fence line in, in the evening hours, I'm maybe guilty of it this evening and I parked in here. There's a space open. So those 12 spaces could potentially
Okay.
be open for evening, council sessions.
So, I mean, that seems a shorter distance to the front door. And I'm thinking of a day like today. It was, I think, quite literally 100 degrees.
Understood.
And the reality is there are processes that have to take place in person. There are things that, we can't do a lot of things, unfortunately, online with the city. Some things we can, but a lot of things you got to come to this building or an adjacent building to do. So that's in my mind. And so I don't know if we're talking about multiple entrances, and I understand the security concerns associated with that, but on a day like today, a long walk, I think might be challenging for some of our citizens.
No, I believe that's a fair assessment. I also think, Amanda did a good job last time about the kind of the one-stop shop. So once you are in the building, you could have those different departments right there. So you may be walking a longer way, but you're not doing a lot of up and down and back and forth trying to find where you need to go to once you're in the building, for a little food for thought there. And then I think the other thing too is really with the positioning of that door for folks that are driving, but also proximity to bus station. And, there's bike parking adjacent to the door. So we're trying to be mindful of those that are arriving, for other means than just a car. But I think to your point, it's fair to say folks would have to be walking a little bit further than they may be used to today.
Okay, any others? Councilmember Klein. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I first of all, thank you for the presentations. That was very informative. And I also, in trying to consider ways to balance the feeling of openness with the community and the need for security, as the chief explained. I do like the alternative perimeter idea where the section of the parking that's closest to Trinity is not fenced in, so that you have more of an open feeling to the community. One of a question that I had when I'm looking at this alternative perimeter diagram, it looks like the fencing is only going around the resident parking on one side, and then along Mike King Drive, there's no fencing. Is that correct? Or is the fencing going around the whole resident parking area?
So on this, excuse me, on this slide here, the red would be the fence. So for Mike King Drive, it still encloses a Sally Port and comes down Mike King Drive. So this parking here would still be.
Yeah, not the secured parking, but the
Oh, this parking
yeah,
lot
that
here?
parking.
So that
Yeah.
parking is, would be considered unsecured. There is the black ornamental fence. If I back up a slide, that is currently out there today, that runs basically on the north side of the taller PVC plastic fence. That would stay. There is some consistency with that in Lewis Center. That would also be a historic feature that would tie into the alternative fence type that at least has those vertical pickets. So that would still stay there. I know the chief has talked about a 4-foot fence, somebody could jump that, but there's still, as a maybe even a visual deterrent, if it slows somebody down for a split second, if the chief, or maybe not the chief, but others may be chasing, at least there's some continuity with that. I think that at the last meeting too, we had some sections talking about the landscape screening in there. So it's really kind of having layers of visual aesthetics through there.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I guess my question is, when you talked about the gate that would give access to residents through that area, I think that's a very visual deterrent to the public coming into the Civic Plaza. And I'm just a little confused that's necessary to have that locked gate there, because that area is not really secured anyway, and you have the
secured parking that has the fencing all around it. So, I mean, maybe, I can understand maybe a gate that would be locked at night, but to have, a gate there doesn't make a lot of sense to me because it's already not secured. Does that
No,
make sense?
I mean, it does. I may let Chief speak to that. I think
Okay.
operationally how we may work that out, I think we're open to suggestions on that.
Yeah, because I mean, for me, someone may be coming from the loop, from this, in front of like down Delmar and the loop and that wants to come in wouldn't have access to that because they don't have a code. But, they could go all the way around and get in. It's not secured. So that's just.
So, yes, Councilmember, the proposal on that is to also have safety for the public, safety for those residents as well. So it's not, I can speak of just last night, 46 vehicles broken into on a hospital parking lot. If you leave easy access, there's no real deterrence. So I'm not trying to have any deterrence for any residents walking to and from. That open parking lot is an area that we're going to have to try to secure with technology, but that's not someone watching that 24/7 and understanding that real component. I was just speaking with Deputy City Manager Smith. Her friend had a vehicle stolen while at work just the other day. So we're talking about employees parking there, public personnel parking there. With the trends that are current now, it is very easy to steal someone's vehicle and to give access from someone that may not belong in that neighborhood as far as that living there or even walking there, but having criminal intent coming from a rear that's unsecured and at least the understanding that the residents, the people that frequent that way, the subdivision members themselves have that access is why I proposed that particular model.
Yeah, and I understand that. It seems to me if someone were intent on getting into that neighborhood to steal a vehicle, they'd just go around. And so in my perspective, keeping that a blocked off area, I think it would be better to have it open to so that people had a free access to the.
Right. And I wasn't trying to limit the getting into the neighborhood. I'm talking about the element, that criminal element getting into the public parking lot. While the citizens are up here for a council meeting and then having their vehicles vandalized, unbeknownst with a soft target.
Right. And that's where I'm a little confused because it seems to me if they wanted to get into that parking lot, they could easily access it from Mike King Drive.
They could, but you're talking about more cameras, more technology, yes, and the likelihood of more visible police patrols in and out coming. So I'm understanding that with the technology uses as well as a deterrent.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hales, please.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Smotherson. So I very much appreciate all of the feedback and the questions being answered. I think the newest fence version is a vast improvement aesthetically. I agree with Councilmember Klein on the slightly smaller alternative layout. I would disagree with Councilmember Klein on the gate. I actually think the key code gate is a good idea, and I think that very likely members of neighbors in the Heights might prefer that because you have lots of things going on here, people coming, court dates, whatever. They may actually like that idea of having that element of limited access into the neighborhood. So I think we've come a long way. I totally understand, and I said in some of the emails, like, this has been clearly, I think, probably one of the most challenging elements of this project for you, with the grade changes, the placement of the various buildings, and how to fit all these puzzle pieces together. So I fully appreciate that. And I feel a lot better about it. And I think the fact that we have spent most of our time talking about a fence is a testament to what a great job and great process this has been. The only thing that we haven't talked about that does kind of intrigue me is with the limited parking in the temporary parking, how many people are going to end up going and parking in the library parking lot and impacting the library? Because that I think will be a lot closer than going down to the north end. But I don't know. So thank you again.
Okay, if there be no other questions, and I do have questions, Mr. McMahon, you're the only one. Did you want to say anything?
Thank you, Councilman Smotherson, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, I was just, I agree with Jeff and Alita that moving that fence in, I think, is a good compromise to the neighborhood. I understand looking at Trinity, if that's going to be the municipal courts, and if you listen to what Councilman Clay's kind of indication of, if we're looking for a short walk, I could see a lot of people trying to park up on Trinity to walk to go to their court date, because it might be a shorter walk than from the parking lot. So maybe the code makes sense. But the bottom line, and I think you'll see this a lot, I saw this in different projects, once you make these type of changes to an area, you will not be able to 100% tell us how the people using it will actually use it. We're going to have to tweak this after it's built. And we're going to have to, there's probably going to be some changes that have to be made as to where people walk, how they best see the use that we laid out with all of the best intentions. So for all of the looking forward that we can try to do here, I think we've got to come up with the best compromise of the issues. And I think we're starting to really get to that with what's been laid out tonight. So I didn't have a question, but that's what I had to say.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay, well, I'll go ahead very quickly with mine and try to get this done within a few minutes. But my first question is to Mr. Derrick, and then I'll ask Mr. Rose if it's all right. I want to direct my next question to the chief. Mr. Derrick, my question is specifically in reference to my concern about the location of the Sallyport and to the public. But if you could answer a question. The Sallyport on the south side, that red line, is that the fence? Am I correct in assuming that is the fence?
Yes, sir.
And if I'm looking at that correctly, there is no landscaping in front of that fence, correct?
It may be a graphic oversight, so that the line's a little bit thicker just to accentuate that. But there is landscape, I believe, on My King Drive, there's a 4-foot landscape zone between the curb and the sidewalk. I believe there is 6 or 7 feet from the sidewalk to the fence, and another 3 to 4 feet on the inside of the fence to provide adequate landscape in there.
Okay.
And there is also, as it turns back and runs and connects into the Trinity or the annex building here, there's about a 5-foot wide landscape zone that we're providing some vertical evergreen screening in there as well up against the fence. So where we can, we are basically on every edge of that fence, we are providing landscape against it.
Okay, so my question last to you is in reference to that fence on that south side of the Sallyport, what's the distance of public walking? Because they're walking right there on that side of that fence. So what would be the distance from the public sidewalk along that fence to the actual Sallyport?
On this side here, between the sidewalk to the fence.
Yes, right there. Yes, sir.
Without having the plan in front of me, I believe it's in the 6 to 8 foot range. And there is some wiggle room with that fence type. If we do go to the alternate, I believe there's some smaller footings in there. So we'll try to get as much separation from the fence to the public sidewalk. If that's maybe where you're going with that, we'll be able to take a look and try to maximize that.
Sure. Okay, thank you, sir. And then my next question is in reference to Chief Hampton. And Chief, and this again is in reference to the Sallyport, because one of the things that I actually spent the weekend doing is that I actually went to Chesterfield Police Station, Creve Coeur Police Station, Clayton, Belleville, Olivet, St. Louis City, and even Baldwin. That's the new station. But my question to you, sir, is what's your comfort level in our location of the Sallyport to the public? Because in all of those cases, their Sallyport and secure parking is nowhere near the public, if you understand what I'm saying. And so we're different than what the standard is out there right now. So what is your comfort level in reference to that Sally Port being in that location?
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem Smotherson, I'm very comfortable because the access for the Sally Port is for the mobile transport to come in and out with those prisoners. When we're taking prisoners that we have that need to go to the court building, they are being escorted out of a different direction, kind of in between the two buildings, closer in between the Trinity and the police annex. So when you're talking foot traffic for court purposes, when you're talking comparative to transport through mobile uses, you're talking very relative short time for that transport to come in and out. So making sure that we have all our procedures and practices in order and making sure that those prisoners are secure is key, but they are being guided into that Sally Port by way of a vehicle. There's no one that we plan on parking a vehicle outside and walking them in. They will have to be escorted in by way of the Sally Port, and they have to be let in by communications personnel.
Yes, sir. And again, as Mr. Derrick stated, that Sally Port is 6 to 8 feet away from the public. In most cases, none of those police stations and their Sally Ports are anywhere near public access or public traffic. So the last question that I have, sir, and again, what you have to understand is that, you know, we are trying to put a police station in a public plaza. Because if you look at their diagram, the last diagram that they have, and Councilmember Clay was the one that brought this up in reference to walking distance. But if you look at that in a different perspective, what I will actually say to you, sir, is that what's your thoughts about U City Police Station being so different than the standard that's out there right now? Because there is no public access, there is no public traffic. There is no public motor vehicle access to any of their secure parking, their Sally Port. And you know, if you understand what I'm saying, because those police stations are either enclosed or their secure parking is behind the police station with a gate access, if you understand what I'm saying. So if you could tell me what you think about U City Police Station being so different than what the standard is out there now.
Well, Mayor Pro Tem Smotherson, I can tell you for the last 5+ years, we've had to be different in that aspect. And so within the temporary facility, we have one accessible Sally Port to utilize for public transportation, for prisoner transportation. In the past, in the old annex, we had no Sally Port. We were bringing people through the entrance where the citizens were coming themselves. And so understanding the different aspects that we have, we're only asking for a state-of-the-art infrastructure to meet the needs that will satisfy any criminal potential trends or elements. And I do believe, in my professional opinion, that this facility can do that.
All right, thank you, sir. And with the time being that it is, we are going to adjourn this study session and start the meeting on time at 6:30. Thank you all. Well, no, I'm sorry. Let's start at 6:35, and that gives the council a chance to take a break and do necessary things. So